Cool. So hi everyone, I'm Emily and I'm a designer on the growth team. And today I'm going to share our iOS specific onboarding that we're doing on the activation side. So the problem that we're kind of facing here is projects are overloaded with options when configuring stage integration at GitLab. So we're kind of onboarding, we're giving you all the options to start with. We haven't really tested out doing very specific onboarding for the projects you're doing. So there's a lot of actions users can take. This can get sort of overwhelming, and we should really determine what the user is building and help guide them through the value that GitLab can add to their application. So in particular, setting up for iOS does take additional steps. So we thought this was a perfect place to start, just getting them set up for a project with iOS. So the hypothesis here is if we know a user is building an iOS application, so we scan their project, we know that, then we should update their first time experience to guide them through a specific setup so that they can get started with their project quickly and without the additional noise that might show up. So really, where do we start with this? In growth, we've been working with Verify onboarding very closely, and this seemed like the best place to start. So start with onboarding, configuring a pipeline, and setting up a runner. We could build on what was already successful for our onboarding there and just adjust the experience to be a bit more iOS specific. But then there was like, I'm not a subject matter expert in Verify or iOS. So like, what's the best way to really get started solving this problem? And this is where I really want to give a call out to the great cross-stage collaboration we had with this project. So we wanted to get involved everyone that could be helpful. So we want to give a great shout out to Nadia, Gina, and Marcel for jumping in, being there from the very start, helping me bounce ideas, just get me on the right track, give me the context I needed to build a great onboarding journey here. And then additionally, I wanted to thank my design pair, Becca, who's been helping me just go through the flows from fresh eyes after I've been staring at them for a while. So before I even jumped into this, I want to call out that this was a great cross-stage collaboration effort, and I couldn't have done it without any of these people. So the first thing we did was kind of figure out the flow. So we realized once they have this project set up and the user navigates to like the empty stage pipeline page, they're ready to use Verify. We want to decide, do they have runners available? Do they not have runners available? And if they don't have iOS runners available, guide them through that setup. And then when they go to configure a pipeline, guide them through the setup for pipeline for iOS. So like what stages are, what variables they need to add, the build and deploy stages as well. So we went through a few different iterations of this, but landed on this updates to the pipeline zero state page. I also added the full design here for anyone to take a look at after. But what we'll really do is break this down into two sections. So when they land on this page, we guide them to set up a runner if they don't have one available yet. And then if they do, we guide them through configuring a deployment pipeline. And then if they're just someone who doesn't need a guide, they just want to jump right in, we provide them with the iOS with Fastlane template. Or if they're not building for iOS, if this isn't what they're looking for, they can always kind of revert back to the original empty state page and get all the templates they need. Then the second thing was the runner setup. We wanted to kind of keep MVC simple, use what was already existing. So for this, we were just going to bring up the existing install a runner modal that you find on the settings page with an additional popover, kind of like, let's get started setting the runner up, giving them some additional context on this. So here they'll be able to set up their macOS runner. They get the instructions. We also provide them with the token here, which we don't on the modal in the runners page because it's already on that runner settings section. And then they can get started with that. So once they have that set up, they click close and we notice they have a runner ready. Then we move to the next one, which was that second box they can click on, which is the pipeline configuration walkthrough. So this one did take a lot of back and forth. We got engineering involved here, seeing what we could do, what was the simplest way to walk users through pipeline configuration the first time. And we landed on kind of testing out a second version of the drawer that already existed and just more of a stepped approach. So users could kind of go through the steps one by one. They could reopen the steps at any point. The reason we decided to move for the drawer versus something like a popover here or like a modal is because the drawer lets them have the context on the right side, but then they can also work on the template as they're going. So they're not losing context there as they're going through this, this design. And then once they get to the end, we just prompt them to hit commit, and then their pipeline configuration for iOS is complete. And then we're thinking, what happens if they don't want this? They can kind of close out of it at any time. We just give them a popover of how to get back in to guide them through. But otherwise, if this isn't something they're looking for, they can close it out and kind of work through the template on their own as well. It's not really something they need to go through if they don't want to. So the next steps we're going to do with this is we're going to run this as an experiment. So 50% versus the control, which is our general onboarding experience with users building for iOS. And then we'll run this until it hits statistical significance, thinking like 2 months, I think is what we were saying. Now, if this experiment is a success and we'll be measuring conversion rate, verify usage, and invitation rate, we'll look into doing more tailored onboarding for other projects and seeing how we can like expand this into the drawer, the existing drawer already, and then see how we can maybe integrate it with like continuous onboarding and a few other things. And that's it. I open it up to questions now if anyone has them.
Gina has the first question.
I'm mid typing, sorry, but I'll voice it. I just wanted to say that the walkthrough side panel that you showed within the pipeline editor is really cool. And what I was going to ask is, how did you end up landing on that idea of using that side panel? Like, did you look into competitors that were using it? I'm just wondering how, just curious about that.
Yeah, so I kind of looked into through a few different walkthroughs. I think if you saw at the beginning, we were looking at doing popovers, and then engineering was like, that's a bit too difficult. We can't do that. So kind of went in. This side drawer, actually, I have to give it to Becca because we were chatting about it during one of our design pairs, looking at different things you could do for a walkthrough. And she's like, hey, what about something that they could see on the side, but then they could also edit the template at the same time. So they have like the same, they can read the instructions, but be able to do it without having to navigate back and forth. We also thought that was a really good idea of building on what was already existing. So there's already existing drawer in like the pipeline editor. Can we just kind of build on top of that for MVC and see what we could do? So that's kind of how we landed on it, just explored a few different options for walkthroughs, seeing what was already existing in the product, and then what we could use that users could kind of edit, but also see instructions at the same time.
Awesome.
Also, I do have to apologize. I only have like my computer screen right now, so I can't see the agenda sharing this. So I can't see all the questions available there.
Yeah, that's okay, Emily. I can. It looks like Blair has a question next.
Yeah, I'm quickly finding out that I am nowhere near as fast as typist as you guys. So I have a former life in iOS development and design, and I was wondering if there was any hypothesis surrounding like the fact that if a developer or a company of an iOS program were to be setting something up in GitLab to develop an iOS app, that we could sort of tailor, you could use like the human interface guidelines from Apple to sort of tailor the experience to them, given that, and again, I say that there's a lot of like assumptions that I'm making here, but like, if you are developing for the iOS platform, you have to do it on a Mac. And so there's a lot of assumptions that these are primarily Mac users, primarily like single ecosystem developers, and they're really used to that, and we could use that as sort of leverage, the human interface guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a very interesting thought on this. We were kind of doing this setup, mostly just getting them started up with like a pipeline running and getting their runners set up. But I think going forward, if this is a success, I think there's a lot more we can add to these tailored experiences with like best tips they could use. Just keep adding to it as we work through like the guided onboarding. And also, if this is a success too, I think we can open it up to like Android, setting up for Android projects. How do we do onboarding much more specifically than we are right now? So I'm quite excited for kind of all the things this opens up to. And maybe we need to do a bit more research to see what else we should add into it. But I like the idea of where it's going.
Cool. It looks like I have the next question. I was hoping you could say something more about, at the end you mentioned, until it reaches significant, nope, that's not a word, statistical significance. How does the growth team determine what statistical significance looks like? Like, is it the same metric across experiments, or does it depend on the experiment?
Yeah, so it'll depend on the experiments, like how many people are going through it, the measures we're doing. So like conversion rate, verify usage, invitation rate is the one we're specifically looking at for this. And this particular experiment, I know we'll have to run for quite a bit longer because statistical significance also depends on how many users are going through the flow. And this flow is a very like specific grouping. So like people setting up iOS projects, which we know isn't going to be like a heavy grouping going through. So yeah, it changes based on kind of what measures we're looking at, kind of how many users are going through the flow itself. Some hit it much faster than others. And we'll just tailor it based on that.
Do you work with your PM on coming up what those stats are?
Yeah, so during the starting of experiments, which actually this is a goal of mine this year, is kind of get more into like experiment writing and helping PMs work with like what we'll be actually measuring. So some of these measures come down from our OKRs. So it's like the OKR that growth team is trying to move. Some of them are ones we want to look through to see. So yeah, we work with like the PMs on helping figure out some of these.
Cool.
I'd just add, Becca, that the PMs also, we work really closely with the data team. So we have data analysts that work with the growth team, and they help with like the formulas that are needed to calculate significance and things like that.
Interesting. Yeah, our team is going through like roadmap planning right now, and there was a question in the template that came up about kind of success criteria and how we can measure that, because I think largely we tend to focus on, you know, is the feature complete? Like, it has the design been through solution validation and then implemented? But I've started wondering if there is anything like any stats we can look at or set as goals. So it's something I'm curious about anyways. I don't know if we have the data in place to collect or the means to collect the data.
We have a process for adding the instrumentation if it isn't there already. So
interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I mean, if you want to chat about it more, you have to kind of figure out what are the right metrics, and then there's a process for creating an issue to request to have all of that set up and instrumented.
Okay, cool. I can look into that later. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, thank you so much, Emily. And next we also have Emily. And this is going to be a, just FYI, this is private to GitLab.
Wait, Jackie, did you want to stop the recording and restart it?
Thank you.